Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you here to Washington MUFON, and SUFON is joining us for a presentation today on some matters of interest in the UFO world. Administratively, the most important information, bathrooms are right out the door and turn left. We will be doing 3 presentations today, and there'll be a break. During the break, there are some refreshments in the back there if you want something. There's also a donation basket on the table there. If you'd like to throw in a few bucks to help compensate the folks who bought the food, that would be appreciated. And Sue, are you ready to go?
I'm ready.
Okay, let me introduce Sue Countess, the State Director for Washington MUFON, and she'll introduce things for today.
Okay. If you can't hear me, raise your hand because I don't speak very loudly. I don't like to. I am Sue Countess. That's one of my many names through the years. And I've been the Washington MUFON State Director for almost a year. I'm also a field investigator, and I belong to the experience, I call it research, other people call it resource team, for people who think they or have been abducted or made contact with something other. And we don't know what other is. I don't. I was a physical scientist for a whole bunch of years, like 27 years, and worked in radiation and nuclear safety for all of those years. I was still a member, retired member of the National Registry of Radiation Protection Technologists, so that we kept studying nuclear stuff, that's not a technical term, to see how what would happen. We know what would happen now. I worked in the Argonne National Laboratory in Chicago, and I was the project manager in charge of the second cleaning up of the world's first 2 nuclear reactors, CP1 and CP2. That took 7 years and a bunch of money. And then I went to Carlsbad, New Mexico, because my mother was dying and I wanted to be close. And that's the WIP site. It's called the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant. And what it means is low-level radiation was being put half a mile down in the salt dome. I joined MUFON in 2012 and became a field investigator, and then a state director in Las Vegas in 2017. And then because of family illnesses, I moved here and was appointed state director in 2023, kind of a default assignment, I guess. I'll answer any questions you have after the meeting, and I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to see all of you. Our first presenter is Walt, and Walt has been with MUFON for 5 years and joined MUFON in 2019 after attending an Architects of the New Paradigm convention and listening to Steve Bassett. He's a UFO lobbyist. He presented, according to Walt and what Walt said, he presented the best UFO information he had ever received. Walt was stationed in Berlin during the real Cold War. He and his Army buddies talk about the good old days. I was around the good old days, but it wasn't in Berlin. He was assigned to, what?
Beer drinking days.
Okay, I didn't say that. He was also assigned to an NSA site, cocktail hour. He and his service member friends started researching declassified, I have a question about that someday, memos about UFOs and remote viewing activities taking place in Berlin and East Berlin. The years he was stationed there were the late 1960s. Berlin was a 5-star duty station during the Vietnam War, but a military career wasn't his life. He spent 50 years in finance and real estate mortgage banking. We call him the IFO man. What that means is that it's identified flying object, and about 99% of his cases are IFOs. The highest rating we can give in MUFON is UFO, aerial phenomena, unidentified aerial phenomena, UFO. Yeah, I know that's just where it is. We can't say, it's Charlie Brown from Belize. We can't say that. So UFO is all we have to say unless you decide that they're going to land in your neighborhood. Anyway, we're very proud to have Walt in our MUFON group, and we want to welcome him to speak today.
Okay. Go for it, Paul. So you're going to introduce
No.
the others later?
Oh, no, I'm going to wait on him.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So, make sure my power doesn't go out. So why does MUFON Washington receive so many cases from Snohomish County? There's a Dr. Dave who is a field investigator here in Snohomish County, and he brought this to my attention, and that is the naval radio station Jim Creek. It's a communication with naval aircraft and submarines. And what made this site famous was in 2019 on Russian state television, Dmitry Kislov identified several American sites that he would claim to be initial targets in case we ever went to war against Russia or vice versa. So those three sites that he mentioned would have been the Pentagon, of course, Camp David, and Naval Radio Station at Jim Creek in Arlington. Now, everybody's worried, but these things have been around forever. This is the site. It's really hard to tell the size of this antenna array, but the sketch will show you. And why am I so fascinated with antennas? That's basically what I did with the military. This is the copy of the clear cut. So that's on the east side of I-5 up by Arlington. On the west side, there's a naval security group in Marietta, and this site was closed in the 70s. This is a radio direction site that the Navy had prior to Jim Creek. I was a radio direction finder. I worked at a site similar to this. We call the antenna array, a elephant cage. So I want to talk about alien bases here on Earth. We are doing the presentation here, and also on June the 1st, we're going to do the same presentation in Puyallup. So today's topics, I want to talk about military remote viewing, not just being a general remote viewer, but more or less the remote viewers out of the 60s and 70s, remote viewing alien bases here on Earth, encounters with aliens at some of these sites, and I'll say this twice, how close these sites are to NSA or military intelligence bases. All of these sites that were remote viewed are very close to NSA stations. The Washington State chapter person that actually introduced me to MUFON, her opinion was that the holy grail of ufology is remote viewing. Now I've got this mic on, is it working?
Yeah, they said it sounds great on mine.
Okay. So a typical remote viewing session consists of a person who is referred to as a sender. And that person will travel to a remote location by the remote viewer. Another person is involved. So there's three different people. There's the sender, there's the remote viewer, and then there's an evaluator. So the evaluator would ask that the remote viewer describe the location of where the sender is placed. The description would include drawings, verbalization, and written words. if the evaluator found that, can everybody see okay? Yeah. If the evaluator found that there were hits on this and the hits kept coming, that would be a psychic phenomenon, and he would be a highly rated remote viewer. So this image is of a ASA site in Berlin. I was stationed there. Sources for my presentation are coming from declassified releases, which when I started going online and looking up some different code names and things like this, it's unbelievable what has been declassified. And that's basically how I came up with this presentation. I am not a remote viewer, never was a remote viewer. My military service was stationed at this ASA site. I left Berlin in 1970, and in 70s, the Soviet Union was spending an equivalent of $90 million a year on remote viewing. Well, they really had to. Our group was a very professional group, and as Dan would say, probably what the Russians were doing, they were more of the woo-woo type, meaning they're really out there. So during the 60s and 70s, there were these companies that came up. One was Mankind Research. So I think that was coming up probably about the same time I was in the service. Its mission was to study the effects of electromagnetic radiation on the central nervous system and researching telepathic communications, doing cranial implants. Sounds almost alien, doesn't it? But these are NSA corporations, basically. Researching telepathic communications versus like code. I would listen to signals coming in. They were working on being able to send this telepathically. Experimentations in mind-altering drugs. Its director was Carl Schachner, and he denied that the US government had any connections with this company. In 1973, a book came out called The Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain. Schachner, the director of Mankind Research, recruited the book's writers, Oslander and Schroeder. The reason he recruited them is to collect protocols for telepathic communications. So Mankind Research also recruited one of the top remote viewers in the world, Ingo Swann, who was an old guy, born in 33. In the book, Psychic Orders from Behind the Iron Curtain, it talked about in the last chapter of the book, dealt with UFOs landing in Russia, 30 miles south of Moscow. And I would hear more about MiG fights with UFOs than anything like this. But these crafts landed in September of '89. UFO alien cosmonauts walked out of their crafts, walked around a community park. All of this was going on. There were discs hovering over nuclear power plants as well as electrical generating stations. Astrophysicist was sent over by the name of Kelley, was sent over from the United States to investigate these sightings. He at that time was a computer systems designer for the Department of Defense. He was also the person most recognized for designing the UFO classification program that MUFON relies on heavily for classification today. Russia's remote viewers targeting Russia set up remote viewers to target this site. After having Jacques Delay go over, there was a release from the Russian Ministry of Security, along with documents from the CIA, that concluded that they could make this statement. And that statement is, this was an alien reconnaissance mission. And it was published in the New York Times in 1989. So the guy who was director of Mankind Research, William Bruce Davis, X-Files actor, cigarette man, they compare him quite often to him. Schachner graduated from the Naval Academy. All these guys are just really up there. He served as a naval line officer, specializing in operations, research, and linguistics. He stayed in Germany, got a master's in the University of Cologne. He is known as being the mind-controlled mad genius behind MK Ultra, father of cyborg. And when he passed away in 1999, he denied ever being granted that. As I mentioned, Schleitner also hired remote viewer Ingo Swann. Swann was born in 1933, passed away in 2013. So he had developed the process of remote viewing for mankind research. He formulated direct, the brain-to-brain communication by sending codes telepathically versus the electronic transmission of code. Ingo Swann worried about the telepathic mind control of aliens over humans. He was briefed at a NSA site, Sugar Grove, West Virginia, on that particular subject. So this is the book that he wrote, Penetration, Questions of Extraterrestrial and Human Telepathic. Book's a hard one to find, but it's talks about Earth-bound alien bases. Like Mankind Research, which was on the East Coast, Fort Meade, Maryland, there was Stanford Research on the West Coast. So SRI hired a remote viewer. So we're going to talk about another one, Pat Price. He was SRI's most successful remote viewer. He, with Ingo Swann, wrote the remote viewing policy standards for the American military. Price was unbelievably accurate, said his CIA handler. This is a pic of Pat Price with his handler. This photograph was taken at an airport when the CIA was testing Price's remote viewing capabilities from a low-level flying aircraft, most likely a Cessna. What struck me the most about this photograph, I think he looks a lot like Bill Murray. So after a not so pleasant death experience, Price passed away in 1977. He had just met with agents from the NSA at Sugar Grove outside of DC. The meeting was about remote viewing that he was doing for SRI. He never really revealed the scope of the meeting, but he ended up taking the documents with him to Las Vegas for another NSA meeting. His son also lived in Las Vegas. There in a hotel room in Las Vegas, Price was found no longer breathing. He had stopped breathing not only once, but 4 times, according to the paramedics and security. So this is a decommissioned site, Sugar Grove. Like all NSA sites, they're all seem to be. So the real meat and potatoes of what I want to talk about is Price's remote viewing of 4 underground UFO bases. The former CIA director back then was Stansfield Turner. And he said Price is the man who could see what was going on anywhere in the world through his psychic powers. His boss was Hal Puthoff, who was then the CIA's remote viewing program handler at SRI. Price told his boss, Puthoff, "You might be interested in those UFO bases that I remote view." Price believed that ET had established 4 underground earthbound bases, and he had remote viewed all 4 of them. Price's remote viewing sessions showed, and his artwork showed humans working alongside with aliens. Price reported that the primary purpose of these bases is the recruitment of aliens and replacement of new military recruits. Declassified documents about Mount Hayes, which is, I wanted to talk about, these are the different sites that I'm going to talk about. The declassified documents from Mount Hayes, which is number 1 of the 4 mountains. Price was the first to report the existence of an alien base under Mount Hayes. He described seeing structures like tubes, and they all, seems like all the remote viewers describe it the same way: tubes, tunnels, and sophisticated equipment. He reported seeing strange humanoid figures working alongside what he believed were military personnel. Price claimed that the base was also responsible for the malfunction of US and Soviet space projects. And he claimed that any attempt to approach this particular base would be counteracted with electronic warfare against the person. I'm not going to play all of this, and I don't even know if it's not coming through on the sound system. But this is off the History Channel. I'm not really going to play it, but it just gives a little credibility to some of the research that I was able to pull off the web. This is an artist's rendering of the underground facility at Mount Hayes. Price also reviewed the second mountain, remote viewed Mount Nyanji in Zimbabwe. And what's unique about this particular site, it's 100 miles west of the aerial school. The reason I bring that up, the aerial school is where in 1994, 62 pupils witnessed UFOs land and creatures walk from their craft. At a webinar that MUFON Washington did November the 20th, a prior aerial school pupil and experiencer who was there at that time was interviewed by the field investigators with MUFON. Our guest speaker spoke about her interview with Dr. Mack. Dr. Mack is a well-known psychiatrist, or was a well-known psychiatrist with Harvard University. And his notoriety comes from interviewing witnesses of alien encounters. In his book, Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens, was a 1994 bestseller. At this particular location, Price remote viewed maintenance and repair underground center, and he basically was able to present artwork of spare equipment and parts being welded. These are sketches from our webinar meeting, and this is the craft landing and the student looking at the craft. This is also the entity that had left the craft. So my favorite is the third site. It's a remote view at Mount Zeal, which is in Australia's Northern Territory. So what else is in Australia's Northern Territory? Well, it's when he was doing this remote viewing, he was actually he knew that he was being detected. So why was he being detected? Because next to that mountain, Mount Zeal, is Pine Gap. And Pine Gap, as you're probably aware, is the most important intelligence facility in the world. Its mission is the collection of intelligence, missile early warnings, targeting nuclear weapons, providing battlefield intelligence. So this site critically supports armed patrol verification and targeting data for drones. It's only 60 miles away. So most of these, like I said, I think in the beginning, is what's unique about where these site locations are. There's an NSA site close by. Another one of the underground facilities is Mount Brigitto, and that's on the French-Spanish border. It's in the Pyrenees at 11,000 feet. This particular mountain is unique because there's been verifiable UFO hangars. This alien perimeter is equipped with advanced detectors and sensors. So the French, they call it the French Espionage Service, operates communication satellites about 180 miles north of this mountain. This alien base was not remote viewed. It's in Russia. We've been talking about Russia. It's Mount Fisk. It's an interplanetary spaceport, and Russian military troops have set up their own clandestine base close by. It's only about 30 miles from Sushi, the Olympics. So with the military's knowledge of these under the mountain alien bases and in researching about the cooperation of certain alien species has led us to a program called the Solar Warden Program. The program is managed by included in the program are 8 cigar-shaped motherships, each longer than 2 football fields in length. The mothership has 43 small scout ships that they typically travel with. So according to military protocol and looking at what's going on today, like with manufacturers like General Dynamics, they recently provided a $45 billion autonomous tank force for the U.S. Army. So this program includes just 1 major manned tank, and it's supported by a large number of unmanned autonomous tanks who are equipped with drones. So it sounds like sort of the mothership with its 43 scout ships. Solar Warden has been around since the 80s, suggesting there's a hidden agenda of alien presence here on Earth. So the program originated originally under Ronald Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative. He sort of hinted at the program and contradicting the known capabilities at that time with NASA. Further proof of the program comes from a British astronomer by the name of Walt, who basically through high-powered telescopes took videos and film of the ships. When a hacker by the name of Beerman hacked into the U.S. Space Command computers, he learned the existence of this program. Well, the Bush administration wanted to extradite him from the UK and bring him to trial. But to do that, his attorneys would have to subpoena the military officers to testify in court at above classified information. The other problem was there was no way that he was going to be extradited from the UK. This is a sighting I had a couple of years back, and 2 witnesses. A witness that drew the craft on the right, it's a 600 or 2 football field length craft, the same as the Solar Warden mothership. And this sighting took place only about 60 miles from the Yakima firing range, which back in the 60s housed a NSA site. So why was it so close? I don't know. I think it's sort of like what I'm doing. I'm reminiscing. I'm going down memory lane, talking about all this stuff. Sometimes I think these sightings that come back and they fly over these areas. But in 2013, the National Security Agency closed this post. And I remember driving Highway 82 and seeing these huge domes and knowing exactly what they are. In a book, though, called The Puzzle Palace, the NSA said that the Yakima Research Station had played a major role for decades in Echelon, which is a global surveillance network operating by the NSA. Its mission was to intercept satellite communications, emails, and calls from cell phones. So I don't know what it is about these UFOs, but they cannot stay away from antennas. This is just an underground site that's in northern New Mexico. I'm going to breeze through this a little bit because the real point of this is their Big Bertha, like Seattle had, to drill this site. It's a 7-story complex housing extraterrestrial life. The tunnel engineer alleges that the underground aliens were conducting experiments there on humans and aliens, and humans and their human DNA. The base is believed to have different levels, 7 different levels. And in this diagram, you'll see the different levels, but what I like pointing out the most in the bottom right-hand corner, it says underground tunnel to Los Alamos. So back to these remote viewers. Lynn Buchanan retired from the military in '92. He had been a military computer expert with the Hercules, the Nike Hercules missile system. He became a military linguist specializing in German and Russian. He was assigned to the Defense Language Institute in Monterey. He was actually a teacher there, professor, I guess. The guys that I worked with that came from the Institute, their IQs were off the chart. Lynn Buchanan mentions one more than what Pat Price did, 5 extraterrestrial bases. And he describes them pretty much the same way. He believes, though, that there are some ETs that are more psychic and some that are less psychic. He categorizes 2 alien categories as there's the unfriendly non-psychics who travel here. And he says the psychic friendly ones are here to help humans and help develop our abilities to become a stronger species. Well, he says the unfriendly psychic ones are here to wipe us off the planet. This is a book that Buchanan wrote. It's just about his whole life experience in the military and remote viewing. Another remote viewer is John Moneagle. He was born in '46. He must be my age. He's a retired Army Chief Warrant Officer. He too is associated with remote viewing Mount Hayes. He said, I've never seen anything like this before. It's like walking into a place I have no familiarity with. The whole thing is underground, and it looks like it's an atomic power plant. So he also goes on to say, I don't get a real aggressive nature from this target. He's calling these sites targets. He went on to draw some radio-type intercept things. And what he ended up drawing ended up being a high-frequency active aurora research antenna array that's only 100 miles north of, 100 miles south of Mount Hayes. No, I was right. Mount Hayes is 100 miles north of this. The HARP program is a scientific endeavor aimed at studying the properties and behavior of the ionosphere. Mankind Research, we talked about all these different corporations, Mankind Research, Stanford Research, MK Ultra, alien communications with humans, mind control. I guess the question I want to ask this afternoon is, did we learn from the aliens, or did our military government agencies and private companies like Mankind Research teach the aliens, or maybe some class of aliens? Maybe we humans are the role leaders and not the aliens. Is this the type of exchange that Lynn Buchanan mentioned when describing non-psychic friendly aliens? Is this the so-called trade agreement that aliens are here helping us and we are assisting aliens here on Earth? I'll leave that for you to think about this afternoon. Thank you.
Now, Walt, can you make sure your computer is disconnected? I will connect up while you introduce me, Sue.
Okay, well, it's only going to take me a minute to introduce him because he said that his.
Okay, hi everybody. There's some interesting discussion going around, and you need to know a little background, so I'll start with some background. Back in the early 2020s, Congress wrote into the defense budget a requirement for the Department of Defense to send a report to them telling them everything they know about UFOs as viewed from the United States military. And they set up what was at that time called the UAP Task Force. And they brought together a group of people and they worked very hard and diligently and actually got the report out on time. Probably the first time in the last 100 years the United States government has ever got anything done on time. But they got the report out and it was very unimpressive, just seven pages long. Now, do you think you could write something in 7 pages that was everything the United States government knows about UFOs? So people weren't very impressed with it. But there were some very interesting statements in there that are impressive. One of them is they said UFOs are real. That is the official position of the United States government. That they're not delusions, they're not Venus rising, they're not swamp gas, they're real things in the sky. And that's a very important conclusion. Now, they didn't say they knew what they are. They said they could be some secret program that we don't have a high enough clearance to be told about in the US government. Or maybe they're from some adversarial government, Russia, China, Iran, somebody making an adversary, Turkey even. Turkey makes some great drugs. Maybe that's what they are. Or other. So they didn't even have the chutzpah to mention the potential that who could be driving these things from other things. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. Who's driving the UFOs? So I always like to start my presentations because I believe you made a point earlier today that you had a UFO sighting you hadn't reported. If you've had a UFO sighting that you haven't reported to MUFON, MUFON.com, and right up there in the upper right, you'll see report a UFO or report an abduction or other experience. So it's a real simple thing to do, and then we'll get a UFO FI on it, and we'll talk with you and work out what your situation is. So MUFON's position, as Sue was explaining to you, MUFON doesn't ever say anything more than it's either an unknown or known. Now, knowns, you're aware of what knowns are. We find natural circumstances that look a lot like a UFO. Venus, very bright in the western sky. Sometimes people see that. Lenticular clouds, things like that. Or they're man-made. And I don't know how many cases I've worked where people have seen a train of Starlink satellites going across the sky and thought it was a cigar-shaped UFO. The ISS, or even just aircraft. Other sorts of identifieds are common camera anomalies, something that we usually refer to as lens flares. So those are what get logged as IFOs. What we log as unknowns is when we've gone over everything we know and we can't connect what the witness saw with any other source that we can identify. We call it an unknown. It's either an unknown UAV, an unknown aerial vehicle, where they can actually see the craft. And most daylight sightings, of course, or craft sightings, because you can't see lights at night. At night, when we see lights in the sky, sometimes people can see beyond the lights and see the actual craft carrying the lights. And that's an unknown aerial vehicle. But sometimes they can't, so we just have to call those unknown others. The point being, we don't ever say, hey, we identified that triangle flag in the sky, and that's from Zeta Reticula, manned by gray aliens or something like that. We don't do that. That's not what we do. When we see something, we try and characterize it as best we can. Size, shape, color, lighting, appendages, speed, sound, everything like that. But we don't assign any name to it. So what I'm going to talk about today, even though I'll have to put a piece of tape over this, is my opinions, and this is not an official position of MUFON, okay? There are many answers to what might be driving the UFO. Everybody says, well, there's aliens. There's a plethora of answers, and I'm going to run through a few of these so you can understand the situation a little better. They might be us, they might be breakaway civilizations, or other relativity states. So let's talk about some of these. Let's start by looking at the US. And I'm going to talk about myself for just a second here so you can understand how I can make these statements. I was in the Air Force. I was a fighter pilot and a test pilot. And after 14 years in the cockpit, I went on to manage the test program for the F-22. And then my final assignment was up in Washington, D.C., where I was the director of test resources for most of the Air Force's major test range, all the way from Vandenberg, clear across Edwards for airplanes, Tullahoma, Tennessee, the Arnold Air Engineering Center with all the giant wooden tunnels and rocket test tubes, Eglin for weapons, and Canaveral for rockets too. So I have flown on most of the test ranges in the United States. I've flown in all the Gulf ranges here for Eglin and Tyndall. I've flown in Holloman and on the White Sands Missile Range for flight tests there. I've flown up in Utah, in the Utah Test and Training Range. I've flown in the Nellis Ranges in Area 51. I'd have to shoot you if I told you what. And then the major test areas here, the Edwards Air Force Base in China Lake, and out here in Point Laguna. Folks, I've been everywhere. So when I make these points, I think you probably have reason to believe me. So my first thing is they said, well, it's just us testing something, okay? Are these UFOs we're seeing just the United States testing something? So I'd like to talk about three main issues associated with testing. I'm a tester, so I know these. The first is, why are you testing something? Probably because it's something that's new technologically that is supposed to give you an advantage over the enemy. Therefore, you want to keep very tight security around it so the enemy doesn't figure out what you have and how it works. So that's why we do our testing on these relatively remote areas. And I tell you, they don't get any more remote than Area 51. I mean, that is really remote. But there's a White Sands Missile Range. You're talking about some big empty open spaces, and that's for security reasons. Also, safety. These are new equipment being tested, and new equipment doesn't always work right. I've had new equipment try and kill me 2 or 3 times, and I didn't like that very much. So that can involve things falling out of the sky, test equipment falling out of the sky, people falling out of the sky, and you don't want that over downtown Irvine, California. You want that out where it'll land on top of a Joshua tree or a saguaro cactus, stab the pilot, hurt him really bad. But anyway, so the last point is, the whole point to test is to get data so you can fix things, right? No data, no test. Well, these test ranges have tens, hundreds of millions of dollars of instrumentation system on them, radar systems to track, phototheodolites to precision track, cameras that can take pictures of the square root of an altitude at 50 miles, that sort of thing, and radios that record data. A lot of these systems are very, very, very small. You can't put a big recorder aboard them. You have to put just a little tiny radio board and then radio all that information around. So for those reasons, I will make the contention that I do not think this is Americans, US, just testing something super secret. You don't do super secret testing over I-5 through Seattle. It just doesn't make sense. So let's look at a next thing that they put in the report. Well, maybe it's the enemy. Now, the common thing is, it's probably just drones. The point is, the word drone is a very, 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 very big thing to define. They can be anything from the little 4-propeller recreational quadcopter type drones. Some of them are as small as fit in the palm of your hand, all the way up into great BQN drones like this one down here. It's the size of a 757. Those are all called drones. So it's great for somebody who wants to obscure things that, oh, it was a drone. But there's something you have to remember about drones is they don't all have the same capability. Now, the little recreational quadcopter drones are very mobile. They move left, right, forward, back, up, down real quickly, like these UFOs people are seeing. So there's the potential it might be a drone. But they're 200 miles out to sea over the Pacific. And quadcopter drones are very, very limited endurance. Many of them can only last 15 or 20 minutes in the sky. There's no way you could drive a little drone like that from the coast all the way out to the Navy and be the tic-tac UFO that Dave Fravor was chasing. Now, there are things that can get out that far. I mean, these drones can fly for 3 days at a time. They could come all the way from China and sit off Point Mugu or Vandenberg and watch missile launches. But they aren't very versatile. They're aircraft-like. They've got the same limitation as an aircraft would have. So you can't have both capabilities of long range, long endurance, and maneuverability like these UFOs exhibit in the same drone. So I think because of these long distance from enemy territories plus flight characteristics that we can document in videos and firsthand experiences, I just don't see that is compatible with what people are seeing as UFOs. So I've just blown away the first two of the report's possible things of what could be in a UFO. Now we're going to move to a really, really, really strange. Watch my hands very closely. They never leave my arms. Breakaway civilizations. Now, what's a breakaway civilization? This is a term probably originally documented or used by Richard Dolan in one of his speeches and books. And what he's talking about is a subset of humanity, just a small group, that has achieved some advanced technological capability and then has withdrawn to a secluded existence and is using that advanced technological capability to basically be UFOs. These are still humans. These are still Earthmen, but they're doing things separately. And there's lots of factors you have to take into account if you're trying to figure out how do you get a breakaway civilization. Was it an ancient civilization or modern civilization? What's the size of the breakaway civilization? Because if you take into account the number of UFO sightings we see in a year, MUFON gets 5,000 to 6,000 sightings in a year. But my favorite experiment. You all came to a UFO meeting, so this might work out. How many of you here feel you at one time have had seen something you would call a UFO or had an experience? Just stick a hand up. About half the folks here. How many of you have reported that to MUFON or NUFORC or the police department? 2. That's not a 3. That's not uncommon. We frequently do these things. I sit in rooms full as many as 100, 125 people and find that 1% of them have reported their sighting. So when MUFON gets 6,000, you're talking more like 60,000. MUFON is only mainly English-speaking nations. I mean, yeah, the French participate, some Spanish in South America. I mean, there are billions and billions of people on Earth who don't even know MUFON exists. So you multiply that, you're probably talking hundreds of thousands of legitimate UFO sightings per year. You don't do that with a couple of guys in a garage. So you've got to talk about the nature of the technologies that develop, the locations where these breakaway civilizations might be, and who's paying for all this. So let's look at some of these factors. First of all, there's a question of ancient versus modern. Now, this takes a little bit of explanation, so watch closely. Again, I'll point out my hands never leave my arms. Most modern scientists believe that us, human, Homo sapiens, just like you and me, brains the same size, can think just as hard, have been on Earth for 100 to 150,000 years. Many suggest even longer, 200 or 250,000 years. Okay? Modern human history, that's when we stepped out of the hunter-gatherers into sedentary settlements and started building cities and writing things down. That's what, 5,000 to 6,000 years. So how many modern civilizations could you fit in 150,000 years? 15, 20, 30? And things don't last real long. Yeah, the pyramids last a long time. I was out there at the pyramids 3 years ago. And they're big, and they're pretty firm, pretty sturdy. They'll probably be there another 2,000 years. But I also drive I-84 into Portland, and there you can look over at the US 30, which is the former main highway down the Columbia Gorge. And it's only been out of service for 30 years, and already the desert's taking it over. In another 30, you won't even know that there was ever a road there. Imagine if you had 10,000 or 15,000 years to wipe out the evidence of your civilization. Piece of cake in 150,000 years. So there could be ancient human civilizations. I'd like to point out, one gentleman is contesting that this picture here, which is an actual picture of a place in Africa known as the Eye of Africa, was at one time possibly Plato's description of Atlantis. Can you see how he drove that opinion? Now, on the other hand, we might have a modern breakaway civilization. Now, what you're talking about here is there's been a lot go on in the last couple of centuries, from the Sonoma Aero Club to the crash landing of a UFO in Texas back in the 1890s. Came across, knocked over a windmill, crashed into a guy's field. They pulled the alien out and dug a grave and planted him in the grave. So there maybe was something, the pilot, not the alien, but the pilot. So that could have been something. To something more like the Nazi technology development during World War II, the V1, the V2, television, guided missiles, things like that. That was some pretty sophisticated stuff. So the options are pretty wide here on where a breakaway civilization could come from. Now, where is it located? A lot of people contend that the Nazis were located in Bariloche, Argentina. You can walk down the streets of the town, 3,000 miles south in Spanish-speaking Argentina, and you can hear more German than Spanish. Or the Nazis were famous for an Arctic expedition that they did just prior to World War II, where it is said that they, using their submarine technology, actually went in under the Antarctic ice cap and discovered tunnels that actually connect up onto land, where moving water underneath the ice had cleared away the ice and made livable airspace under it. Operation High Jump in 1946, Admiral Boyer took a fleet, not a boat, but a fleet of ships to the Antarctica, including an aircraft carrier, for a year's worth of research. He came back with his tail between his legs in a month and never said why he had to leave. Well, you could hide a base if you had this technology that could actually fly in space. You wanted to be somewhere close, but where nobody could see you. What better place than the backside of the moon? And those are pictures purportedly taken on the backside of the moon. You can see that structure in this crater here. You could be undersea. 3/4 of the planet is covered with water. Humans have a hard time dealing with anything deeper than 100, 150 feet. What better place to hide than underwater? If you can endure the rigors of traveling through outer space, I'm sure you can figure out how to deal with the rigors of being under a few 100 feet of water and hide from the people on the planet. Again, that's not fake. That's actually a picture of something that's lying on the bottom of the Baltic Sea. Or they could be underground, as Walt points out. I mean, it's not hard at all to get one of these big boring machines, as long as you don't drive it in Seattle, and get it to go, hundreds of feet a day, boring out tunnels. You could quickly open up a huge base. Lots of people don't know that of the 14,000 V-2 missiles built to fire during World War II, every one of them was built underground. The Germans' famous Me-262 jet fighter that was used at the end of World War II was built entirely underground. And they'd roll them out of the cave, put them on an inclined railroad to the top of the mesa, the mountain under which they were built, and launch them off that mesa with just enough gas so they were really lightweight to get to the nearest Air Force base. Now, last one, you have to follow me a little bit again. Close to the note, my hands never leave my arms. What would be wrong with having a breakaway civilization amongst us? How many of you know of some strange industrial-looking facility that's kind of sitting out in the middle of nowhere? You don't have no reason to seem to have that plant out there that people drive in the gate and out the gate at 4:30 every day. Do you know your neighbors that well? How do you know your neighbor doesn't work for a breakaway civilization? You say hi, you mow the lawn, you talk about how the Seahawks are doing, but he never talks about where he works. And lots of times, if you think about it, if you're going to build a solar warden vehicle like Walt was talking about, yeah, at some point you're going to bring together a big, amazing looking ship. But that ship's made of nuts and bolts and wires and televisions, tubes and transistors and things like that that can be made anywhere, just bought off the market. So could a breakaway civilization just be living right within you? Could be. So let me talk about it would be very expensive to do this. If you were a breakaway civilization, like I say, it's not the sort of thing that two guys in their garage. Tens, hundreds of thousands of UFO sightings yearly. That's a big operation. For an ancient civilization, that's not untenable to think about. Something that was around for hundreds or even thousands of years could collect a huge amass of wealth, which they could fund it with. Even in modern times, when the Nazis swept over most of Western Europe, the first place they stopped when they drove into town was the bank. And they collect an awful lot of gold, silver, precious stones, etc. Much of it has been recovered, but I can guarantee you that the vast majority of it was never accounted for. A workforce. How do you get a workforce together to do all this work for you? It could take a big place. It could take an underground base like Walt talks about, or an undersea base. Like I said, it could be that many of those people are just out walking around in society except when they go to work. This is an example of, you take a piece of Washington desert with nothing but sagebrush and greasewood in it, and you put 50,000 people out in it in 18 months and build a reactor that makes big bombs. I don't know, Sue's here, I better call it. They're actually plutonium bombs. And it takes a large presence to build a UFO fleet. And this is the famous picture of Washington, D.C. in 1952. So you have to get an advanced technology out of this. Probably as a minimum, you're going to have to come up with some sort of gravitational propulsion, because what we see when we see UFOs, people report all the time. No inlets, no exhaust, no wings. None of the things you eat traditionally think of as being the ways you move something. So the most logical thing most folks see is some sort of gravitatic propulsion. And it takes a lot of energy to travel the distances, move the speeds that these things move. There's been a physicist who analyzed some of the movements of the Tic Tac that Dave Fravor fought against out there. At one point, this thing dropped from 80,000 feet to surface level of the water in a second and a half. Now, if you divide that distance by the time, you could say, hey, it'd have to be moving 4,500 miles an hour. Well, there's lots of things that can move 4,500 miles an hour in this day and age. But if you do it like a physicist and say, hey, you had to start from zero, accelerate to it as fast as you could, and then slow down to zero again by the time you got to the water, that's probably something more on the order of 50,000 miles an hour and experienced 40 Gs plus. I'm a fighter pilot. I pulled 9 Gs, and I tell you, you can't pull 30 Gs and be real happy about it. So, the next thing, so you've got to have a lot of power. You've got to get some sort of unique things. So, what can do this? I'm going to build 2 scenarios. First, I'm going to build an ancient scenario. The last ice age started to end around 200,000 years ago. Temperatures kept getting warmer and warmer and warmer and warmer. And then about 12,500 years ago, they took a big dip and then came back a few hundred years later, back up again. It's called the Younger Dryas period. So imagine a civilization that, this is easily less than 100,000 years ago, that could have had a civilization as advanced as we are now, be there, develop everything, and then get hit by an ice age. What would Seattle look like if an ice age came back? Well, you'd have plenty of ice for your ice Starbucks, but probably wouldn't want to live here. They became highly advanced, and look how, if you were to say, what is modern society based on? It's really probably based on the technologies developed in the last 250 years. Doesn't take a lot of time to develop modern societies when things are going right. The society subsided, and who knows why it subsided. Maybe it subsided because of the ice age. Maybe there was some other natural disaster, a tsunami or a meteor collision with Earth that made it subside. Or it could have been a social disaster. Humans don't get along with one another real easily. Might have been a civil war of some sort. But at that point, they decided, those who were left over decided to pull into a small, restricted group, a breakaway society that still existed on Earth down through the ensuing centuries, and is still here now. Maybe they're in secret societies. I don't know. You have a secret answer? Maybe you're one. They're assuming they're in our goals. Or a more modern version of this. I frequently mention the Nazis in World War II, so that's what this is based on. Everybody knows that during World War II, the Nazis developed a tremendous amount of high technology, rocketry, television, missiles, guided missiles. One of the things they developed was the Nazi bell, which is purported to be some form of gravitatic device. We never got our hands on that one. It got away. And they weren't dumb. They could see in the latter years of the war that things weren't going their way and they were likely to lose. So they devised a plan not to have a Nazi nation or state, but a Nazi international. They took the great wealth they'd accumulated and bought into controlling shares of corporations around the world are actually owned through front companies by what was originally the Nazi Party. They have lots of gold and wealth stored away where they can make use of it to continue the development of these things. And they picked up the most vital areas of this technology and they moved it. They had these giant transport airplanes that could fly 3,000 miles. They had submarines. Everybody knows the Nazis were famous for their submarine technology. At the end of the war, they actually had submarines that were cargo submarines, not attack submarines. One of which U-234 surrendered off the coast of the United States with purportedly several hundreds of pounds of fissionable uranium. What else did they ship out? They took all this technology with them to a unique place and further developed it into what we now call UFOs to pursue their goals unknown. That's a breakaway civilization. That's possibly what could be what we keep seeing as UFOs. Now let's look at some other potential options, and they're not limited. One of them would be, instead of extraterrestrials, maybe we're being visited by extratemporals, people from the future coming back via time machine, a measure of relativity, and trying to influence or research what went on back here so they can prove what actually happens before they come to their civilization. Grays might be what we look like in 200 years, except they got it all wrong. It's not skinny gray guys with big heads. It's skinny gray guys with big heads and thumbs about the size of my forearm from playing video games. Instead of extraterrestrial, they could be extra-dimensional. Now, my physics is nowhere good enough to be able to explain this one, folks, but there are people who contend this. Modern physics suggests that there are many as 14 dimensions to reality. And what they're saying is that this could be a civilization that exists in a parallel dimension to our dimension and have found a way to breach the dimensional divide between us. That it's basically us in another dimension. Now there's the traditional extraterrestrial solution, and I will never be one to deny this the potential of it. But let's go through just for a second the cons and pros of extraterrestrial. One, the first thing they'll talk about is the extreme distances involved. The nearest other star is 3.5 light years. The nearest other star that has a planet that has anywhere near Earth-like conditions that we could exist at is 14.5 years away at the speed of light. And we're a long way from going the speed of light yet. And I don't know that we will be going the speed of light 100 years from now. So either these guys are really advanced and they figured out some way to beat the speed of light, or they can live a real long time. There is no objective evidence of extraterrestrial life. Now, I know that many experiencers, I am also, like Sue, an experiencer resource team member, and I interview these kinds of people routinely. And they say they've had contact with extraterrestrial life, but there's been very little to document that. I mean, some scratches, some marks on the flesh, maybe an implant that could be extraterrestrial, it could be just something that they felt when they were a little kid and jabbed something into their arm. There's no real substantive evidence of extraterrestrials. We know with modern science, astronomy, we have now identified that there are planets on other stars that are in what they call the zone, the Goldilocks zone, where everything's as perfect as it is here on Earth for human existence, life to exist. But there've never been any evidence. I mean, they've never seen any contact emissions, anything from any of those planets suggesting there was an extraterrestrial civilization. Material. Everybody talks about recovered crashes. Again, that may be kept secret from us, but out in the public, there's nobody that's got a crashed flying saucer. There are some people that have what they claim are metamaterials, little bitty pieces of things, which don't look like they were manufactured on Earth. But again, that's very minimal evidence of an extraterrestrial civilization. Side note, how many of you have heard of Denisovans man? Denisovans are like Homo sapiens or Neanderthals. They're another species of humanoid exhibit. How much evidence do we have of them? I mean, there are hundreds of articles written about Denisovan man. What do we got? One bone. So, is there a justification for the humanoid shape? Most aliens people claim they've seen, many of them suggest they were shaped like a human. Is there any substantive evidence that this shape is the best shape for existing? Nothing, except we do pretty well. So let's look at the other side, the pros. You can go to Missouri to the Smoky Mountain UFO Fest and sit with a couple of them, or you can number of UFO sightings, like I say, tens, possibly hundreds of thousands of sightings a year. It means something's really there. It's kind of hard to hide that big of operation on Earth. Might be able to do it, but if it's not on Earth, then it's probably from off Earth. There are the cases of confrontations with non-human species. And in many cases, including the Ariel school incident that Walt was talking about, where a craft was seen to land near the playground, and some of the kids ran over to look what was going on and actually confronted a non-human species, by all appearance, that actually projected into their brains the idea that he wasn't from Earth, was from somewhere else. So you've got that kind of supportive evidence. And the last thing is Occam's razor that says the simplest solution is probably the most likely. And if they don't look like they're from around here, they probably aren't. So what might be I would draw your attention to this book here by, sorry, let me get back here. Need my glasses here. I can't remember his name. Craig. Craig Composis, yeah. And he has a book where he has gone through all of the accounts he can find of situations where people have identified some sort of extraterrestrial species they've encountered. And in his book, he identified 82 alien races that have been to Earth. And in an interview with the Earth team, when about 3 months ago, he said, basically, my editor made me cut it off at 82. He said, I could probably identify another couple dozen. So what are they like? Well, there's basically what I would call human-like aliens, commonly referred to as Nordics, that are approximately human height, have the same features and they could be shopping at the mall with you and you couldn't tell the difference. One of the ladies who used to be a nerd member here with with Washington said she had, one of her witnesses said she had had an encounter and was shopping at the mall and looked down from the second balcony down to people walking down below. And she saw, boy, those look like, and in her mind she heard, oh, she's seen us, we better get out of here. Next, there are somebody called the Greys, gray aliens, and there are a variety of these species, from small grays to tall grays with various features. Some of the grays appear to be different in external, size of head, shape of eye, things like that. And some people suggest that these are not natural entities, that these are the equivalent of organic robots that have been built specifically for space travel and to go around and do their examinations. There are reptilians, again, human shaped, but from facial features, skin texture, things like that, they felt to be more related to reptiles than mammals. And the insectoids, sometimes referred to as the mantises. These appear to be insect-like, although large in size, and usually are accredited as being the boss and the most intelligent of the species available. So there's many options there of what could be driving the UFOs. Now, one option that you probably shouldn't overlook is some sort of spiritual realm. The Jewish Torah, the Christian Old Testament gives several accounts. In the book of Job, God asked Satan where he was been. He says, "Where do you come from? From roaming about on the earth, walking around on that." A demon or demonic spiritual entity could be what we're talking about. In Genesis 5, it talks about, now it came about when men began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, that the sons of gods saw the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. Again, some sort of spiritual entity. And then, of course, there's the famous passages out of Ezekiel, where Ezekiel saw a wheel within a wheel beside the cherubim. One wheel beside each cherubim, the appearance of the wheels was like the gleam of Tarshish stone. So, don't overlook the potential of a spiritual realm. My hands almost leave my arms on this one. They could be a combination of two. One of the most famous incidents was the man who, after interviewing an individual who had this happen, he had been incorrectly allowed to come into a presentation that appeared to be flying saucers. And they identified them as ARVs, alien replica vehicles, I believe is what that meant. And so maybe what we're seeing is human-built UFOs based on alien technology. Or there's, in the breakaway world of the breakaway civilizations, there are some that said that the advances in technology in the Germans during World War II initiated with contact, like Walt was talking about, mental contact with aliens, talking with people from secret societies like the Vril Society, and they gave the information to our engineers and technologists to manufacture things. This is a tough one. Maybe we aren't seeing them. It is pretty well documented, and I could tell you some sources to go to if you were interested, that the intelligence world has been playing around with the idea of affecting human minds for many, many decades. Initially, it was more where they had sensors, transmitters, receivers in close contact with the brain, sometimes actually implanted, but usually more some sort of helmet-like thing like this, or if you're a fan of Back to the Future, what Doc Brown was wearing when he greeted Marty at the door. Eventually, they got to the point where they didn't need to be in close contact. And by the transmission on certain microwave frequencies, they could also contact the brain. And initially, what it was tried to do is to block out memories. But eventually, they were learning the ability to implant memories. That didn't happen, like you saw a UFO. And we know that technology has been advancing. I don't think it would be a stretch to suggest the ability to focus on a human in the distance and cause them brain memories that suggest that they were seeing something that in fact wasn't there. And to what end, for what reason, who knows? But you have to be aware that technology exists. One of the big conundrums of UFO investigation is situations where multiple witnesses in a group give different descriptions of what they saw when you interview them independently. Or a witness will point out that there were other witnesses nearby that he saw were there. You know, a guy sees something in the sky, pulls to the side of the road, gets out, looks at it, and other people pull to the side of the road too. But other people don't pull to the side of the road. Other witnesses didn't see anything. That's very frustrating when you're interviewing a witness and you find corroborating witnesses that say they didn't see anything. So mind control might be the answer. Here's my favorite. You all took tests. You made it through high school. You remember there was this answer and this answer and this answer and this answer, and old answer E, all of the above. That, I think, is above a likely combination of what I've discussed today, a summation of these various things. I think that's probably somewhere in the answer. This has been a very, very, very short look at a very broad topic. I probably could make a presentation an hour long on any one of the slides I've shown you today. Some of these things are very, 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 very complicated. So, again, if you're not a MUFON member, you can go to the MUFON.com webpage. You can find a chapter that you can join. MUFON is divided up into state chapters. Of course, if you want to join, you can talk to that lady right over there. And she can help you. This is the Washington state chapter. If you're interested in knowing more about UFOs, and I find that this is useful sometimes to talk about, if you're interested in a basic, broad understanding of the ufology issue, I would either recommend The Novice's Guide to UFOs, or probably better, Richard Dolan's UFOs for the 21st Century Mind. These are both very broad looks at all the corners and aspects and unusual parts of the ufology. If you're interested in an even deeper dive in, Richard Dolan has his UFOs in the National Security State books, which are very, very deep books about ufology. If you're interested in some of the things that people say about recovery and how, LEDs and microwaves and computer transistors and things like that They're actually in technology you can read. Philip Corso's book, The Day After Roswell, which I found to be a pretty useful book. If you're interested in who's driving the UFOs and you think they're aliens, you might check Kathleen Martin's book, The Alien Abduction Files. Kathleen Martin is probably one of the foremost experts on the abduction philosophy and happens to be the niece of Betty Hill, of the famous Betty and Barney Hill abduction incident. And lastly, if you're interested, if you're an engineer like me and want to deal in the technical aspects of geology, you might want to read Nick Cook's book, Hunt for the Zero Plane. You might want to read it anyway, because Nick Cook is a fantastic writer, and he turns something that is basically a documentary on this, documenting this area of gravitic propulsion, and he makes it read like a thriller. He's really good. So I highly recommend these. And I believe if folks don't have any questions, we could break for an intermission, but I would be happy to take questions. Who do you think's driving the UFOs? I'll be standing here. Looks like everybody's ready for a break. Bathroom's out the door, food behind you there. We have one more presentation after the break. And feel free to chat with Walt or myself or Sue or Jeff if you want to talk about MUFON. If you have a specific incident you'd like to talk to us about, please catch on with us. Thanks.
Walt and I brought from, that we get every month. We put them on this table and that table. You're free to take them home with you. Sometimes we have to clean our stuff out too, and they're very interesting. They're about the cases that we've reported on. Some of our more interesting cases. So our next speaker is Jeff Kindle. He's new to MUFON. Are you new to MUFON or just new as a field investigator?
Both.
Okay, all right. We're very proud to have him. He has a BA in special education from Central Washington University, has a master's in education with an emphasis in educational technology through Central Washington University. His 20 years in public education as a teacher, and he developed a computer learning program, or I don't know what I call the whole thing, process for disabled students to identify their learning styles.
Right.
We live in a system that generally recognizes one style, and many children learn in different ways. So we can give him a lot of credit for that. He spent 10 years in the athletic activity administration for a public high school, was a branch manager for the Nike team facilitating contracts for high schools and colleges, so he saw all of that. He's an avid mountain biker, hiker, and fly fisher in high mountain lakes. He notes he's always had an interest in the unexplained in our world. So welcome. Yeah.
So I think where it's all started for me was when I was a little kid. I grew up on Lake Tapps. And I grew up on Lake Tapps we moved there in 1964. And I can tell you, it doesn't look anything like 1964 now. In 1964, we were one of two houses on this point that I lived on. And that particular point looked right at Mount Rainier. So Mount Rainier has always had a big part of my life. Because as a young kid, we'd always be outside with my sisters and all their boyfriends and whatnot during the summer. And we'd be looking at the sky, and we'd see lights, here and there. Never really thought anything of it because my dad had worked for Boeing and said, no, don't. Those are just airplanes. That's not anything different. So that's kind of where I got the bug of there's something going on in our skies. But, you know, life goes on, and you move through school, and you graduate from high school, you graduate from college, you get into a career, you get married, you have kids, and all that is put on the back burner until you get close to retirement. Because then you are seeing down the road that you're going to have all the time you ever wanted to do everything you always wanted to do, whenever you want to do it. And so I started I've always been a hiker and a fisherman, fly fisherman. I always would hike and go into high mountain lakes to do my fishing. And my son at the time, this would have been in about 2012, 13, he started down this avenue that he was going to research and he was going to find Bigfoot. And so he kind of pulled me into that a little bit, and pulled me into the point where right when I retired in 2018, he took me to a place called Bumping Lake, and he said, "You're going to see real tracks." And I'm thinking, oh, come on. Well, we go up there, and sure enough, you know, we find these tracks. But to me, it could have been anybody out there walking around in the mud, because they let that water down in that lake. But I thought, okay, you know, I'm gonna go with this, because it was a great thing for he and I to be able to do. And we're out in the woods, nobody's around, and so this is our thing. Well, unfortunately, shortly after that trip, he had a heart attack and died in his sleep at age 33. So I lost my partner. But I thought, I'm going to continue on, and I'm going to keep doing this for him. So I continued to go into the woods, and now I started paying a little bit more attention, met some people like Sean right here who you know, I would bounce stuff off of and talk to about, you know, what is this and what could it be? And until then, I really started having some strange things take place. And I thought, this is not, you know, I fought the Bigfoot people that say this is a ape and it's just, you know, held over and whatever. But I knew it was more than that. And I started to really make a shift. And as I said, I had some experiences that were unexplainable. Then a friend of mine sends me an article about a plane crash. And this plane crash, supposedly, and we're going to talk about it later in this presentation, the plane crash, the whole gist of this article was the pilots believed they were hit by something, or they hit something, and it was a mid-air collision. And then from there, you know, the plane eventually crashed and things were sealed down. So that's what really got me into I got to get out of this Bigfoot idea, and I need to start looking beyond. And that's when I looked into MUFON, and I contacted the state director at that time, kind of shared some stuff with her, and she said, we need people like you investigating for us. And so I joined MUFON, I jumped into the training program, and you know, I guess I feel like I've kind of been on a fast track. I should have never told Walt my plane story, because now here I am. He says, Jeff, you have to present this. So that's where we are today. This is the cover of a magazine called Skeptical Inquirer for 2014. And their question is Mount Rainier a UFO magnet? Well, the gist of this article was written from the perspective of there's so many lenticular cloud formations seen around Mount Rainier that people mistake for UFOs, and that's why some people would say it's a UFO magnet. Well, today we're going to look at three areas. We're going to explore three different elements that, if it's not a UFO magnet, it's a UFO, or it's a magnet for unexplainable events. And so that's kind of where we're gonna go with this. And we're gonna start, we're gonna start with my look at this is the inside the 30-mile radius of Mount Rainier. Now, why did I pick 30 miles? Because I wanted to make sure I could get my plane crash in that 30-mile radius that I'm investigating. But 30 miles takes in, you know, really a lot of area. Within that 30 miles, there are 19 communities within that radius with 168 documented UFO sightings. And when I say documented either with NUFON or with MUFON that are directly related to Mount Rainier. Okay, so I'm not saying that somebody from Enumclaw saw a UFO over Auburn. That report from Enumclaw that UFO is over Mount Rainier. Okay, so that's kind of how I put that together. And we're talking about things from, you know, bright lights that all of a sudden engulf a campground to people driving in their car on, I believe it's 705 outside of Ashford, having something come down, hover, and then take off in front of them. Zigzagging things seen from Cougar Rock Campground. Then there are three, though, that I really want to zoom in on. And these three, and I'll do this in each of my sections. I have a lot to show, and then I pull out like 3 or 4 in specifics. Okay, this is a New Fork sighting report from August of 2022. And this individual was taking a picture from the Henrietta Jackson Center, Little Falls Trailhead, is taking a picture of the mountain. They're tourists, they're up here, they have their camera, and this kid is just clicking off, bing, 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 with his digital camera. Okay, he gets, and now you can see there, you don't see anything in here. But when he gets home and he starts looking through his pictures, all of a sudden, in one picture of that string that he took, he picks up this. Okay? Which some would say is just the same as a blurry picture of Bigfoot in the woods. But I mean, this is not in anything else he had on that particular series. So that takes us to next slide. This is from the MUFON case management system. Again, these are tourists, and this is from the Sunrise area. And these people are driving up, they get out of the parking lot, they're walking to, if you've never been to the Sunrise area, this is just an unbelievable view of the mountain. You get this thing right in front of you, and they pick up this. Didn't notice it until they got home. And then here, you see a little bit clearer. But again, these things are showing up in just one picture of a series that people are taking. Okay. Next one. Some of you may have seen this one. This is a security camera at Paradise. This is looking east. Okay, in fact, I actually had this on my, it was a cover photo on my, or cover for my research page. Right here. Now, this camera in that parking lot, here's a close up. This camera in this parking lot is on a 60-second timer. So it takes that one, and then 60 seconds later, it takes this one. And whatever it was is gone. Okay. Now, and I'm not gonna stand here and tell you whether it's a UFO or not, but it sure looks, sure looks good. So outside of the communities, and let's go back here. So again, this gives you an idea of that 30-mile radius. I kind of skipped over this. This kind of shows you all the communities that are on the chart. Okay. If you're wondering what anybody know what that line is? If you're wondering what that line is, that is what's called a ley line. Okay, that's a whole other presentation. But this kind of gives you an idea of what we're taking in here. So let's move from communities to this, missing people. I'm a huge David Paulides fan. Part of it is I can really relate to him on a personal level for two things. Number one, when I was teaching, I had his cousin in class in my very first class when I taught 6th grade. I didn't know that until my son passed. And she had got a hold of me, and this was pretty much after the fact of my son's passing. She got a hold of me because she asked me if I knew of missing 411 books. And I said, well, yeah, I've been on those for a while. Well, David Paulides is my cousin, and I thought you could relate to him because he just lost his son. And so David and I connected that way. And ever since that conversation with him, I've been a big fan of what he's out there doing. And one, of course, is missing people. And the missing people that we're going to talk about today are in that cluster of Mount Rainier.
How did David lose his son?
Suicide. Really an unfortunate situation. And I guess the presentation isn't to talk about sons that have passed, but I can tell you this. Both of those boys, because ironically, they were both 33 years old. Both of those boys, highly intelligent, highly functioning. I mean, they were just on different tracks than normal 33-year-olds. Anyway. So this is his plot, what he calls his cluster. And the entire thing is here, but I've put the 30-mile radius on there, and you can see there's a lot of missing people in there. I believe like 19 is the number, but let's just start looking at them. And these ones in blue, I will come back to. But I mean, these he goes back to 1946, Bumping Lake, and you can see where, this is a guy that vanished searching for a hunter in the Bumping Lake area, never found him. This guy vanishes snowshoeing in Paradise, never found him. Walter Robinson, hunting in Bumping Lake, never returned to the camp, nothing ever found. It just goes on and on and on and on. Longmire, Comet Falls, Paradise, Mowich Lake. The Mowich Lake situation, this was actually a professor from the University of Washington, Sam Duval, who drove to Mowich Lake, parked his car, got out of his car, went right to the Mowich Lake Trail, was going to take the trail that circles around down into the Ipsit Creek campground area, and then back around and up. Okay, they found his water bottle, identified that they found a water bottle that was identified to be his on the trail. Again, Neither Sam nor any of his belongings were ever found. Okay, but let's zero in on 4 of them, because these are really interesting. Marcella Rominsky. Marcella is 4 years old. July 1st, 1950, and at that time, her and her mom, they lived in, or her parents, they lived in a little town called Fairfax. Fairfax was up in the very top of the Carbon Canyon. It was a mining town, and in 1950, there were still people there. Today, there's just foundations, because when the mining left, the people left. But Marcella and her mom hike out the Carbon River Trail to go to a place called Chanis Falls, okay? They get to Chanis Falls, and mom decides they're gonna have a picnic there. Mom decides before we have our picnic, I'm gonna take a picture. So, if you can imagine, mom wades out so she can get close enough, so this picture turns out okay for her. 15 feet behind her, she says, is her daughter, Marcella. She takes the picture, turns around, and the kid's gone. Just like that. Well, of course, they bring in some searchers, people are looking, can't find this little 4-year-old. 9 o'clock the next morning, so now this is in July, so the night temperatures are gonna get cool, but they're not gonna get super cold. Well, 9 o'clock the next morning, 2 hikers find her 2 miles up above the falls on a ledge higher up on Mount Rainier. Now, when they find her, her dress is on backwards, her shoes are on the wrong feet, and her laces are just everywhere. So the question is, how did she get there?
Was she dead?
No, she
Did she
was,
say
she was,
anything?
pardon me?
Did she say anything as a
No.
kid?
Has no idea how she got there. The next one is a guy named Eric Lewis. And typically, Eric Lewis is a professional climber, and typically part of David's research does not, especially on mountains, does not involve climbers, because climbers go missing pretty often. But because of this guy's climbing experience, where he had been to Nepal, he climbed Mount Everest, he'd climbed in Chile, he'd climbed in Argentina, he actually summited Mount Rainier at least 10 times, okay? Well, he's climbing with 2 experienced mountaineers, Don Storm and Trevor Lane, and they are taking the route up Gibraltar Ledge. This kind of shows you, this is not Eric, but this shows you Gibraltar Ledge, and this shows you the path up to 14,000 feet. Okay. Don's leading the team. He gets to 14,000 feet. They're on there using a line. We click on. Trevor gets to 14,000 feet. Eric hooks on to the line. Weather is starting to make a turn, but Don at the time can see Eric, in between, blowing snow, and then all of a sudden, the rope goes limp, and they pull it up, and there's no Eric. And there's no explanation why a person with that kind of experience would unhook themselves from that line. Never found, gone, just gone.
Was it the carabiner unhooked?
Unhooked, yes.
So someone would have had to mechanically do that.
Either he did for whatever reason, or something or someone, right, you're exactly right. Okay, this next one is, this one's really interesting, because this is about a lady named Karen Sykes. And if you are a follower of the Seattle Mountaineers, you'd know the name Karen Sykes. Karen Sykes, 70 years old, avid runner, hiker. She wrote some safety manuals for Mount Rainier National Park. She's written hiking books for the Mountaineers. People would say that Karen knew the mountain like you and I know our backyards. I mean, she was that familiar with every avenue to go up that mountain. Well, Karen and a friend are gonna hike out of Sunrise the Owie Lake Trail. And this is in June of 18, so it's kind of early, all right? So they hike up, and about 4,500 feet, they hit snow. And they're not prepared for snow, I should add. Her friend decides, this is good enough for me. Karen tells the friend, I'm gonna go ahead and go up a little bit further, and then I'll be back. And it shouldn't take me more than an hour, because she wanted to actually see the condition of the lake. And this would be the lakes that are 5,200 feet. So she's going up 700 feet in the snow. Okay, and if you can imagine, it started out like so, and then the further up she's going, the deeper and slushier and sloppier it's getting. Okay, well, she never returned. All right, so her friend gets a hold of the Park Service. They bring out the searchers. They had 100 searchers, multiple canine teams looking for her. No luck. 3 days later, three hikers. 3 days later, three hikers, between threes in there, find her in a place called Boundary Creek, which is on the other side of this ridge. This is Governor's Ridge, okay? And Governor's Ridge is at 6,500 feet. So Karen supposedly went up all the way, for some reason, all the way up and over Governor's Ridge, found her body down in a ravine, dead. For someone with the kind of knowledge that she has or had of the mountain, that one's pretty unexplainable as to why she would even do that. Because getting up and over this ridge, she would have been in at least 3 to 4 feet of snow at that time. So, another just unexplainable thing. How did she get there? What happened? They did find her though. The last one I want to talk about, and all of these are coming out of this book, which is Missing 411, the State of Washington, which is David's latest book. Really, really good. I mean, it was great for me because I could relate to all these areas that he talks about, especially Mount Rainier. The last one, though, this one's really kind of interesting. It's kind of a little bit eerie to a point as to how this all connected. We had just finished the flyer for this presentation, and we had posted it out to different places. I put it on this group that I have, and all of a sudden I get contacted by this young lady who lives in Wilkeson. And she says to me, she says, is Chet Hansen going to be part of your presentation? Because she asked me what my presentation was about inside the 30, and I told her one part of it was missing people. And she said, is Chet Hansen going to be part of your presentation? And I said, it's the weirdest thing you're asking me this question right now, because a couple days prior to that phone call, I had watched a video that David had just posted about a missing photographer in Mount Rainier National Park, who's from Wilkeson, and his name is Chet Hansen. And at that time, I knew I needed to make him part of this, just because he's in the Wilkeson area, he had to be part of this presentation. So I told her, I said, yeah, I said, I just found out about him. She says, I'm Chet's parents' next door neighbor. And so she, through this society that she has presenters do, she was having this presentation on mines in Wilkeson. And she goes, you need to come up, I'll introduce you to his dad. So I go out and I get to meet Chet's dad. And now this happened, Chet went missing in 1997. So this is 27 years ago. And that man, because he's had no closure, that man is grieving still to this day. And I thought, okay, I'm going to share with him my experience with my son, thinking that, you know, this might put him a little bit at ease and feel a little more comfortable to talk to me. And as soon as I mentioned it, you could see tears welling up in his eyes, because I told him, I said, this never goes away. And so anyway, we had a nice little conversation. He's invited me to come back to the home. And like I told him, I think the Chet Hansen case could be a presentation on its own. But in his particular case, Chet left home to go to a place called Shriner's Peak, which is kind of around the other side from Wilkeson. He's got to go Highway 410 around to the other side to be able to take some pictures. And at Shriner's Peak, he runs into two hikers, and he's walking around with his light meter trying to figure out if he wants to take pictures from there. The hikers talk to him, you know, he does his thing. Next thing he says goodbye, and he's walking back down the trail to go to his car. Two hikers get done doing whatever, you know, they're doing. They walk down the trail. There's Chet's car, no Chet. That's the last time anybody saw him. No camera, no backpack, nothing. Completely disappeared. So that's kind of the missing people part of this. And it's just, you know, we have UFOs that are being seen and photographed. We have missing people that are just absolutely just vanishing. Now let's talk about some plane crashes. This is what really kind of got me questioning even more what is going on out there. Again, here's my radius, and these are all plane crash sites. Okay, the one we're going to zero in on is right here. Okay, but first let's just take a look at kind of a listing of these. From 1944, this is 44 to 83, unknown, could be weather related. Cause of fire, unknown, played radio for landing on McCord Air Force Base. That was the last contact. This one we're going to talk about. Supply drop, they found it 400 feet below the summit. You know, so many of these, there's no explanation for why the planes go down. And these blues over here, you know, kind of indicate that we're not talking blowing snowstorms or anything. We're talking pretty good weather for those to happen. Again, you know, no radio communication or radar track. No evidence of pre-existing mechanical malfunctions. This is one that I want you to remember. No evidence of pre-existing mechanical malfunction or failure. Plane pushed down. Okay, that's an important one that we're going to come back to. So the one that got my attention is this one. April 1st, 1959. This is a C-118 Liftmaster Douglas DC-6. This thing left McCord Air Force Base at about, well, let's just go through the timeline. Here's our timeline. Left about 6:30, an hour and 15 minutes into the flight. We've hit something or something hit us. Ironically, the exact location at this time is unknown. Mayday, headed back to the base. Exact time and location unknown. This is it. Plane crashed at 8:19. Observers at the crash site, it was as if it was pushed down in a horizontal position. It was shredded beyond belief. This is what was reported in the PR.
Are most of these crashes, where the pilots are found or not found?
Well, we found all of these guys.
So mostly this is not missing people, this is just.
No, we're just strictly going plane crashes. Thanks for clarifying. So in the newspaper, the initial military media response from Colonel Booth was a radio report from the plane indicated there had been a mid-air collision. It would appear there was some kind of mid-air collision prior to the crash. So that's the media, that's what the military is telling the media when they're asking. However, what's really a little different is the military's first report was that the C-118 was struck by an unknown object near Mount Rainier, damaging the rear horizontal stabilizer, knocking a large part of it off the plane. Okay, and witnesses see that plane and it's fighting to maintain altitude. For some reason, the plane did not land at McCord. It turned and went north, striking trees on Crocker Heights or Sparkle Hill, if you're familiar with that area. Eventually crashed at 8:19. Okay, what was reported now, April 3rd? Right now, we really don't know, we may not ever know, investigating all possibilities. An engine could have exploded. If either occurred, it could have made the pilot think there was a mid-air collision. No other aircrafts reported in the area. And this is a good one right here. The plane could have collided with a flock of geese or been hit by falling meteor. April 4th. Now the plane may have hit trees on the south hill southeast of Oregon. This may account for the pilot's radio message that the plane had hit something or had been hit by something. Possibility of a mid-air collision or now. Pilot's statement that he hit something may have reference to the high ground timber. This is now Times reporting. Possibility still that there could be a mechanical malfunction. News Tribune. A helicopter is searching the path reported. No concrete evidence to back up speculation of a collision. Unlikely the plane struck a tree or any other ground object. The flock of birds is kind of a problematic possibility. Still investigating an internal explosion. Officials have not completely ruled out the mid-air collision. But in the absence of the collision clues, investigators continue to believe the pilot's report of a mid-air collision to be correct, and the investigation will continue along those lines. But still, they're kind of thinking this thing was hit by something. April 3rd. Experts from Norton Air Force Base are flying up to McCord to investigate this thing. April 4th, took them 1 day to figure out that the collision is ruled out. Cause has been determined at high ground and trees southeast of Oregon, in addition to mechanical malfunction, has been determined to be the cause of the crash. And you're going to see this is true. I'm not saying it's not true. But let's see what witnesses said. This guy's in downtown Oregon, described to the police chief of police, 3 parachutes in the air trailing. Driving home, I saw what looked like a flare in the sky, saw a terrific flash. Okay. It appeared one engine was on fire, the entire plane burst into flames, observed a brilliant glow, northerly direction, followed by a second glow. Vern Freeze, Norton Air Force Base. No indication of any UFO activity of any kind from any witnesses. The only really unusual evidence was the conflicting statements of the Air Force and the published reports. Because remember their first report, it was something hidden by Mount Rainier. That never comes up again. Gladys, who is an independent UFO investigator, and I still have not been able to determine if Gladys was part of the Bob Gribble group called Aerial Phenomena Research Group. I don't know if she was part of that group or not, but she took it upon herself to go see Robert Killian, who's a McCord Air Force Base, or McCord National Guard, at his house, and asked if he could comment on being silenced about this whole thing. And his response was, let's put it this way, my company doesn't want me to talk about it no more. So now, let's look at these are actual people I talked to, still living. Leland and May were young kids working in Leland's parents' greenhouse, and you can see their description. They watched the plane lumber across the sky above Prairie Ridge. It was trailing flames for what I remember for a couple hundred feet. And when we get to the map, I'll show you where all these people made these observations. May says about the same thing. But this one's huge. A guy named Randy gets a hold of me. And because I had put out to my group, I basically put out a question. Anybody remember this? Do you know anybody that was there? Anything ring a bell? Randy calls me. And Randy's probably like 70-ish, probably a little older. He says, I was hunting with my cousins that lived in South Prairie in the late 60s and early 70s in the hills above the South Prairie Valley. And you'll see this on my Google Earth shot. We saw something flashing in a tree that appeared to be a big piece of aluminum. It was as if it fell from the sky and ended up tangled in the branches. Jacob says his grandfather talked about this to him, talks about the Sparpole Hill incident. Again, Scott, same thing. He's on a place called Patterson Road. I'll show you where that is. Watched it burning across the sky. This one's a little different. Laura remembers her mom telling her that the mother of one of the victims had actually come to town knocking on people's doors, trying to get information about what had happened because the military had not told her much at all. Okay, so here's the views. So this is the crash site. There's your aluminum panel found by Randy. This is Leland and May at the greenhouse. That's Jacob. This is Scott. Scott's on Patterson Road. Here's Sparkle Hill. Okay. And I'll show you the path of the plane, but I just wanted you to see what their views were as they're looking at this thing, because it crashes up here. So if it's coming in this direction, they all have a pretty good shot at it. Okay, the Aerial Phenomena Research Group, that is the Bob Gribble group. Okay, and they saw and heard about this plane crash, and they actually, their first report was exactly as reported by the Seattle PI. However, they weren't really satisfied at that point, so they went ahead and did their own report on top of that, and found that aerial explosions in Seattle at 7 o'clock that night, 7:20, another explosion. The exact time isn't known for this, but during the early hours of darkness, mysterious lighted objects were seen in the sky above Kent, north of the crash site, and Carbonado, which is really within this path. Sightings of mysterious objects in the Orion area confirmed in a telephone conversation with Orion's police chief and the public information officer of the Corps. The public information officer of the Corps said that were flares being dropped by parachute as part of a parachute jump exercise. Okay, and remember, this is Bill, we already talked about him, he saw this, but Mr. Delwood, who's the news chief at Fort Lewis, denied that any kind of parachute exercises were going on. After the crash, more explosions in Seattle, and the next morning, following the crash, Gribble's headquarters in Seattle received an anonymous phone call stating that the radar in the cord had picked up UFOs prior to the crash. And he neither denied nor admitted. So Saturday, the 4th, Gribble and his investigators go to Orion to meet with the chief. The chief said he would be more than happy to meet with them, but it had to be in person. When they get to Orion, the investigators find that the chief's at a conference with an Air Force colonel. The town was alive with Air Force people at that time. After waiting 15 minutes, the chief told investigators he had nothing to say. Any statements would be provided by McCord Air Force Base. The police chief and the Orion officials had been silenced. This statement was given to investigators by a source close to the chief. Residents had been advised not to discuss the crash with anyone. They were scared. The investigators were advised to mind their own business and basically leave town. So now we're into damage control. The Air Force is working frantically to control the narrative. Residents have been silenced. Air tower operators at Fun Field, which is just on the hill above Orion going west, going towards McCord, Fun Field, and as far south as Auburn, were asked to sign affidavits which would compel them not to discuss that flight. What were they trying to hide? And did the Air Force radar actually see a UFO hit that C-118? So here's the conflicting information. Remember, it was struck by an unknown object near Mount Rainier. Mr. and Mrs. Jones said they saw the parachute objects, but there was no training of any kind going on during that time of the crash. The investigators investigating the crash scene determined the plane slammed into the ground in a horizontal position, as though it had been thrust to the ground by an unseen force shredded beyond belief. So most of the time, these things are gonna, I would think, come down like so, not just kind of fall. The military accident report, no evidence. Upon examination of engines and components, number 4, firewall shutoff valve was closed. Fire seal door had not melted. A thorough investigation of the engines and accessory records didn't show any deficiencies. Engine and structure specialists found no evidence. Flap sections were at 20 degrees, and 20 degrees, I believe, Dan, means it's still trying to climb or stay up. All right?
No,
What does 20 degrees mean?
flaps are used in a landing approach, not a climb out.
So are they on the wings?
Mhm.
Okay. Main landing gear did show evidence of being retracted. All doors and hatches indicated that they were secured prior to impact. Parachutes were there. But the question is, and this is all in this report right here, this basically says what I just had on the screen. The question is, what was this? What had been redacted? So, military conclusion was no evidence, no UFOs, plane was flying too low, it was dark, not many houses to light up the area, the plane struck Sparkle Hill, and the official cause was to be determined in pilot error. Now, let's just take a look here. Here's the path. So, this is the path of the plane. Okay, McCord's out here, so it comes along this path, comes all the way out here. This is Carbonado, South Prairie, Oregon. Comes along here, makes a turn. Now, I'm not really sure why it would have made this turn. It makes this turn, hits Sparkle Hill right here, and then at some point is when it was determined that it turned back, continued straight on until it crashed. All right? And if we look at it on Google Earth, so would it come above up here? Would it come out, made the circle, Carbonado's out here, made the circle, came down, and there's nothing that says that it didn't hit Sparkle Hill. So it came down, hit this right here, and this is when I think things kind of blew up, continued straight, or continued in this direction, and then crashed eventually out of town. But the position of that hunter's panel, and who knows, those guys could have been making that up or just saying it, but the position of that hunter's panel is what really kind of makes you wonder. So the question is, was it hit by a UFO or not? That's it.
Is that the wrap?
That's it. That's the politest information. If you're interested in any of that, I told David if I was going to use his book for this thing, that I would give him a little plug. This is a personal plug of my own. If you go into the woods to hike or whatever, first of all, I'd say don't go by yourself. And lastly, if you have to go by yourself, make sure you carry something like this, which is a personal locator beacon. So if you get in trouble, all you have to do is push that SOS button and somebody can hopefully find you. Okay, thank you.
Are there any questions by anybody about any of the presentation?